Politic. Авторская программа Кирилла Задова, посвященная текущим мировым проблемам. Бутик Politic. Предвзятый обзор, субъективные комментарии и искренние оценки Кирилла Задова. С понедельника по четверг с 3 до 5 вечера. Бутик Politic. Сказал, как обрезал.
Приветствую, друзья, с вами Кирилл Задов, это Бутик Politic. Сегодня 24 ноября, год 2020. Вторник. Сегодняшнюю программу по следующему принципу построим. В первой части у нас в гостях Шушкевич, кандидат в Ассамблею Штата Йорк от 46-го избирательного округа. Поговорим с ним о фактически скандальной ситуации, которая возникла там с подсчетом в 46-м округе голосов, с absentee ballots. Интересная тема, напоминающая, в принципе, то, что происходит с нашим президентом сейчас тоже в какой-то, не во всех аспектах, но в каких-то из них. Вот. А в финальном сегменте этого часа на выбор. Да, я еще не решил, на самом деле, либо поговорить о начале транзита, но об этом я должен хотя бы пару слов сказать, между администрациями, который начался формально вчера. Естественно, после того, как программа Бутик Politic закончила вещание, как это обычно происходит. Вот, и я еще ни разу, никогда словом не обмолвился о визите на Нетаньяху в Саудовской Аравии, что, в принципе, само по себе интересно, и скандал. Вот. Поэтому скандал в смысле, потому как все отрицают. Поэтому, может быть, все-таки на этом сосредоточимся, потому как времени поговорить о транзите еще будет много и не раз, я надеюсь, мы сможем это сделать. Вот второй час, так как мы давно не касались белорусской темы, и пришло время опять об этом говорить. Дмитрий Щегельский, белорусский общественный деятель, будет в гостях в Бутик Politic, и мы будем час беседовать, час, в смысле, наш академический час, не астрономический, вот, беседовать о том, что происходит в Беларуси, вокруг нее и международной некой адженде разных игроков мировых, как они в Беларуси играют. Это, я думаю, тоже должно нас всех заинтересовать. Вот примерно такой план на сегодня. Напоминаю, что вы можете мне писать 347-460-0877. Это СМС-портал прямого эфира. Для всех, кто в прямом эфире меня слушает. Нет, моя Филадельфия. Application iPad, Application RUSA Radio везде в нас. И все остальные, кто смотрит меня на YouTube и подписывается при этом на канал, да, потому что он хороший человек и подписывается на канал. Кирилла Задова просто найти в YouTube. Вот, и также эти программы можно посмотреть на радийном YouTube-канале RUSA Radio. Или слушать меня на SoundCloud в любой точке земного шара. Ищите меня в Facebook, Twitter, задавайте ваши вопросы там, потому что вы слушаете меня в записи. И опять же, у вас будет роскошь обращаться ко мне в неурочное время и задавать вопросы, в принципе, в любое время суток. И как только я их вижу, я стараюсь на них отвечать.
Бутик Politic. Сказал, как обрезал.
Здравствуйте, друзья. Еще раз к нам присоединяется президент нашей радиостанции Анна Пекерман. Ань, привет.
Привет. Здравствуйте всем.
И к нам присоединяется Шушкевич, кандидат в Ассамблею Штата Йорк от 46-го избирательного округа в Бруклине. Марк, how are you?
Да, Hi, Марк. Два слова. Марк мог бы быть членом Ассамблеи от штата Йорк, от 46-го избирательного округа. Это место когда-то занимал Алек Брок-Красный, всем известное место, Кони-Айленд, Грейвсенд и так далее. И что самое интересное, что с Марком произошло то же самое, что произошло с нашим президентом. Марк выигрывал это место, то есть когда закончились выборы 3 ноября, он лидировал, он уже считался победителем, но после этого дня начались пересчет бюллетеней. И чем больше бюллетеней, чем меньше шансов у Марка было удержать это место. И в конце концов Марк его потерял. И примерно потерял сейчас с разрывом в 500 голосов.
То есть надо ладно, это немного.
Да, вот такая вот история с Марком. Я просто хотела немножко ввести всех в курс дела, а теперь мы действительно переходим на английский язык, потому что Марк не говорит по-русски. И,
к сожалению, пока.
К сожалению, да, несмотря на то, что у него польские корни, вот, но, по крайней мере, он нам сможет рассказать нам много подробностей и интересных вещей по поводу того, что произошло с выборами, и с пересчетами, и с досчетами бюллетеней, которые получались по почте, и как это поменяло исход событий для всех победителей от республиканской партии в Южном Бруклине, потому что Марк не один такой, ассамблея была, и также Вита Бруно, который баллотировался на место сенатора от штата Йорк, тоже от Южного Бруклина, который тоже выигрывал в день выборов, но как только начался подсчет absentee ballots, все, полный проигрыш. Сейчас узнаем немножко больше подробностей, и деталей. Mark, excellent. Thank you so much for coming to our radio.
No problem.
And yes, I just gave a little bit of a synopsis of what has happened with you and with other Republicans who actually won South Brooklyn on the night of election, and then lost after the absentee ballots started to be counted. So let's get into it a little bit more. So it's only 6 days ago that you pretty much found out that you did not get the seat. It's not 100% final. There are still more ballots. There are still more irregularities. But the truth of the matter is, the Russian community is no different from any other community. And, we also don't have such confidence in our election process anymore because there are so many discrepancies that are going on. And obviously, a lot of those discrepancies have happened with you personally. And can we just go through how things were evolving? Like when the when the polls closed, how you were leading? You were
pretty almost 3,000, approximately 9%.
Wow, that's pretty huge, and also very irregular for that district because in 80 years, I believe, there's never been a Republican Assembly person on that seat. It was always Democratic, and all of a sudden, so everybody who voted on that day, they voted Republican, pretty much by majority.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the ballots started to be counted. Now, my question is, why are the absentee ballots counted after the elections and not before, since they were already there?
Yeah, I mean, it would have been nice if it was counted before, or at least if they had the total number of ballots before, because when I called on election night, my team called to get the numbers. It was a little over 5,000 absentee ballots. And when I did the math, she would need about 80% of those in order to win. She didn't get 80%, but the fact of the matter is the number just kept increasing. It went from 5,000 to, when it was all said and done, over 9,000. Now, a lot of those 9,000s are duplicates and invalid ballots and things of that nature that still need to be counted. So the number of ballots that were actually counted, I believe, is going to be counted when it's all said and done is probably between 7,500 and 8,000. But that still changed. If I had those numbers from the night of election day, I wouldn't have declared victory the next day because it seemed like it was a sure thing at that point. And the fact that traditionally election day, who wins or loses. If I won or lost on election day, I would have liked to know for that it's not a whole month. It's not election month. It's election day. And, they allowed the absentee ballots to be postmarked on November 3rd, which allowed ballots to start coming in after election day. The in-person absentee ballots, they have drop boxes now, which was never a thing before this year, where in the early voting sites, instead of mailing your ballot, you want to personally drop it off at the Board of Elections, or in this case, what's new is the ballot drop box. So people are going to early voting, and instead of waiting on the line for early voting, they filled out their absentee ballot, they just drop it in the box. And then on election night, there were absentee ballots that were in the drop box. So that's where a large portion of these numbers came in. But it's still very frustrating to find the number constantly rising from 5 to 6, then from 6 to 7. Oh, we don't expect many more. Then it goes from 7 to 8. And it's like, you're realizing that your chances of winning are no longer in place. And, right after election day, I was already speaking to people about getting funding for the education programs that I wanted to pass, speaking to people about doing the farmers market and healthier food in Coney Island for the residents over there that are on food stamps to be able to get access to healthier food. And, so I was working right off the bat trying to speak to people to get some of these things done. And then I'm like, okay, we got to hold on. I might be, spending my time making all these plans, and then, it doesn't come into fruition because I can't do anything. And that's exactly what ended up happening. So
one big thing that I don't understand is, as far as I understand it, the law in New York is that if you voted via an absentee ballot on the day of the elections, if you change your mind by the day of the elections and came in person to vote, that vote overrules. That is going to be the vote that's supposed to count. Now, if they were accepting ballots past the walk-in elections done on the election day, how do they keep track which is first, which is last, and which vote should actually count?
Unfortunately, this year there were people, due to a vendor error, that were mailed 2 ballots, and some of those people mailed in both because they weren't sure which one was going to count, even though both of them had valid scannable ballots in them. And then some of those people were still uncertain and voted in person. So the way it works is to take the one with the later date, whether if you mailed in a ballot on October 10th and then you mailed in another one on October 30th, the October 30th one is the one that's going to count. If you also voted in person, then both of those ballots would be invalid. But it does leave room for human error, because the people who are working at the Board of Elections are the ones that are going through these ballots and checking with the voter records to see if they also voted in person, and they have to handle thousands more, 20 times more the amount of ballots than they normally handle. I'm not saying that errors happened. I mean, they probably did their job well, but it does leave room for human error, especially since, it seems like they're overwhelmed with a significantly larger number of absentee ballots than they're ever used to handling.
Now, by how many votes can your opponent win? What has to be, how much more votes does she need to have in order to be declared a victor?
Well, they don't certify the election results until I think the 30th, and I don't know exactly how many more she would need to make it where it's unattainable. I want to estimate around 100 more, because I think the last time I checked, and I haven't gotten the updated numbers since prior to the weekend. I've been trying to get updated numbers, but last I heard she was up by 642, and there's somewhere between 700 and 1,000 ballots remaining. A lot of those are in-person affidavit ballots, where they go into the voting booth and they say they don't have a record of them as a registered voter, and then they fill out an affidavit ballot, and then that gives them the right to vote at that point. Then they check with the Board of Elections checks to see if they are in fact a registered voter and whether or not that's valid or not. And then, so they got a lot more that were invalid, but I think there's approximately 700 affidavit ballots, and those are in-person ballots. So the fact that I did well in person might mean that I'll do really well in that. And I think a lot of those affidavit ballots are in the Brighton Beach area as well. So, and I did really well there. So I'm hoping that I did a large percentage, but I conceded earlier this week, yesterday, because the probability is highly unlikely. Now it's kind of reversed. Before she needed 80%, now I need like 90% or something of that nature in order to overcome. But if it does get to, even if I diminish the amount to around 200 votes, then that triggers an automatic recount, hand recount, and then they could, see maybe some of those ballots that were counted are invalid, or whatever the case may be. Maybe there was machine error or something of that nature, and since they're hand counting them, they might, notice other errors or something. But
can I, in any part of that very complex system as you described it, and Anya described it, because it's really complex, and pandemic made like everything, all cards like mixed now. It's all different game. Yeah. Not like it used to be 4 years ago. So on any part of that game, do you still believe in integrity of election system in Brooklyn? Do you doubt integrity of the system?
I have my doubts. I don't know whether there's enough of these absentee ballots that would have made a difference in the final result of the election, but I do know that the Board of Elections doesn't update the voters that have died, and they're still sending them absentee ballots. I don't know the number of people that is. It's also, people could request a ballot for somebody else if they have their information, and whether or not that person actually requested it or not is a different story, because you could do that online now. So there's things that make it possible to commit fraud. I don't think was on a large scale where, 1,000 of these happened and that influenced the end result of the election. But in my opinion, whether it's 1,000 or 100 or 1, I want to, expose these issues so that way people who think that they're just going to do it because nobody cares. That's part of the problem. People are mailing in their dead parents, absentee ballot, and because they want to vote for their candidate, and people need to be prosecuted for
right.
that. But
This
is New York, and they're very liberal, and they know a lot of that's in their favor when people do things like that, and they're not going to prosecute people. And I'm going to, it's going to take a lot of time to investigate in depth in the details of all these thousands of ballots to find how many of them were possibly fraudulent. We noticed a lot of irregularities, hundreds where there was no signature or the signature didn't match. I personally, during this process, which was just invented this year, I believe, by Governor Cuomo during the primary, where he allowed people who forgot to sign, signature doesn't match, they allow it to be what's called curable, where you could go to the person's, you call the person or go to knock on their door and say, hey, you forgot to sign.
Right.
Or you didn't seal the envelope, or you didn't put the envelope.
Is it constitutional?
I don't think there's anything against the Constitution with that, but I mean, they're allowing them to fix the problem. Like, you forgot to sign, it was never okay before. If you forgot to sign your ballot, that was an invalid ballot. It wasn't, it just wasn't counted at that point. Now they're allowing people to fix it.
And is your earlier concession to your opponent prevent you from challenging the result in court?
No, there's nothing legal about a concession. If they count the votes and I have somehow more votes than she does, I'm still the winner. It's just, more for a public traditional persona to congratulate the other opponent and, be,
polite and normal and gentleman,
good
right.
sportsmanship in a sense, but, not with sports. I don't know what other terminology to use, but that's basically what it is. And in my concession speech, since it got some attention, I was able to highlight some of the ideas that I put out there, like the unfair bank overdraft fees, funding affordable housing with municipal bonds, the education, life skills, and after-school programs that I wanted to bring about. So I was able to highlight some of those things, and I figured even if I lost, at least, bring some attention to these ideas that the Democrats or the Republicans haven't brought up. And I'm hoping that some of the politicians out there say, oh, well, these are good ideas, maybe we should do them. But I'm not very confident that they will, which is why I decided to run for office myself, because I know that if I'm in there, I'll fight to make these things happen. And other politicians, they're in the pockets of the bankers and the real estate developers, and that's billions of dollars in the developers and bankers' pockets, and they don't want somebody like me going in there, which is also why I wasn't able to raise money from these rich developers and bankers, because they fund candidates that are on their side. So,
by the way, this is amazing. I mean, Mark, you pretty much broke all the standards of the elections. You're completely unknown. You never ran for office before.
And
Republican in a neighborhood that did not have a Republican winner in 80 years. You raised only $1,420.
How much?
$1,420.
How is this possible? How you can get on the ballot?
That was the last filing date. I think it was around like 2,000.
Whatever.
Right,
That's the same number.
Not the usual over 100,000 that you see in a state assembly.
No,
Wow.
not at all. And yet you won on the day of election.
It's a fight. It was a fight.
Yeah.
It was amazing, and you got 51% of the vote for everybody who voted in person on the day of election.
It was actually 54%.
54.
The reporters are reporting 51 because they're looking at only the Republican line, but I also had the Conservative Party ticket. So when you combine the two, it was 54%. So that's where it was a 9%.
I mean, that's amazing. That's unreal. That's just miraculous in some sense.
Even the final tally, when you count the absentee ballots, I had over 20,000, which is more than Pamela Harris had over 20,000 as well in 2016. She was the Democrat. I believe that was the record for any candidate of any party, and I surpassed that number. So any candidate of any party, and somehow I still lost because apparently approximately 6,000 more people voted this year than 2016.
But that's a statement. It's a statement.
I mean, how you going to now? If in case you eventually everybody gonna agree that you lost, but we don't know that for sure yet.
Yeah.
It's still in the process, and you have a chance. But if that happened, that you realize that this is it in this election cycle, this is it. What's gonna be your next step? How you gonna?
Well, there are the city races, city council, and things of that nature.
In a year from now, right?
Next year, yes.
Next year, and then 2 years from now, there's the state assembly. So maybe I run again in 2 years. Maybe I run for something on the city side next year, but I'm not really sure at this point. I'm hoping that, things get better within the next 2 years and I don't even have to consider it, but I'm not very confident that, my opponent, I didn't take any shots at her the entire election. I wasn't running a mudslinging campaign. I was focusing on my issues. She wanted to attack me after the election because she lost, but she hasn't done anything for the community from a legislative standpoint. The people who are on her side say, oh, well, during the pandemic, she delivered food and masks to people and stuff. And it's like, okay. Well, if you're a pizza delivery guy, you could do that. You're capable of doing that.
No, any politician
any
would do that.
human being is capable of doing that.
Right.
And obviously, it's good for publicity and photo ops and things of that nature. But delivering stuff is not, that's not what a legislator is supposed to do. Like,
you got to plan and you got to organize.
Right. She hasn't written any laws. She hasn't come up with any ideas to better the community.
That's overdraft fees. Interesting thing. Overdraft banking fee. That's what you were saying. It's a big long shot. It's cool.
It's cool. It's something that both parties can agree with, and people don't want to admit. Some of the other politicians are like, well, why is that one of your issues? I said, well, every politician should agree with that's better for the people, because people, and I outlined it on my website, markforny.com. When you do the math, if you go over by $10 and you pay $335 on it, that's 350% for 1 day. So that's an APR of over 100,000%.
Right. Nobody just do the math.
And I used to be a financial advisor for one of the largest banks in the world, and I'm not going to give them a name drop because I don't work for them anymore or like them anymore.
Good.
But one of the branch managers showed me the P&L, profit and loss, and somebody who had over 100,000 sitting in a checking account earning no interest, they made more money off of the average guy who had direct deposit, $2,000 in a high interest credit card, and is paying some overdraft fees throughout the year. They make more money off of that guy than the person with 6 figures in a checking account earning no interest. So they take advantage of a lot of the people who are struggling, and that's one of the things that if I brought a New York Fair Banking Act to the floor and people are not voting for it, then they're in the pocket of the lobbyist bankers, and that's a way to expose them.
Right.
And, obviously, people, don't want that. Maybe some people on the Republican Party don't want that. I don't know. But whether they're a Republican or a Democrat, if you're against that, then,
you're against people then.
Exactly.
Right.
But I still want to make a big point. I mean, this election in South Brooklyn also proved the pattern of how people were voting nationwide. Mm-hmm. I mean, it showed that the people were voting Republican, even in New York.
29% with that. It's unbelievable.
It's crazy. And look at South Brooklyn.
Since 1984. I think it's the highest number.
The in-person people who came to vote in a district that has never voted, that has not voted for almost 100 years, voted Republican. We have to take this into consideration. We understand the absentee ballots is a big deal this year. Yeah. But it's still so unclear. And the only thing that is clear is how people voted on the day of the elections. And we can be certain of that. What has happened outside is very doubtful. And listen, we can't speculate. We could, but we won't. But the thing is, as a citizen, as someone who votes, as an American, as someone who loves this country, I want to know the truth. I really want to know what happened to this election.
Everything should be checked.
On a local level and on a national level.
Right, federal.
I speak for myself.
No, I agree. Everything we should know.
My confidence level has to go up from where it is right now, because there are so many iffy things that are taking place, and we just want to make sure that we live in the country that we think we live in, that we came to live in.
Yeah. I mean, you see it happen with communist countries. The rigged elections are the start of the fall of countries like Venezuela. And, whether the Democrats won or not, we just want to know that it was fair. That's not too much to ask for.
100%.
And I think, you mentioned the rise in Republican voters. I think a lot of the people are realizing that these mainstream media outlets like CNN and so on they're constantly reporting things that are inaccurate.
That's propaganda machine.
Obviously biased. And, some people are still brainwashed by it, but others are starting to realize as many times as they're proven wrong, due to social media, other friends posting and sharing that, the information that they're saying about Trump being a racist and things like that is just, trying to fit their narrative, trying to paint this picture that he's an evil guy. And when you actually do your own...
And kids believe this, by the way.
Yeah.
I was speaking to kids. They are believing this.
Listen.
This is a problem.
Yeah.
Well, they're saying that Trump is a racist. He hates women. They're saying stuff. Where did you get it from?
I don't know. A lot of things are being said. It's very hard to believe anything that is being said these days, but we still need to understand that we're protected by the Constitution. And I personally have certain doubts about that, especially the way this election has taken place and how people are being manipulated and what they're being told and how things are positioned. Honestly, this is not the country we came to. It's the country we came from.
Yeah, and one way or the other, we need to have more accurate results on election day. We shouldn't drag this process out the whole month. I mean, people, I did another interview in a diner. One of them, I was supporters that volunteered with Nicole's campaign and helped me somewhat as well. She's like, she didn't hear the news that I lost. She's like, what are you talking about? I thought you won for sure. You won by 9%, 3,000 votes. I thought it was a done deal. I said, no, the absentee ballots the number just kept rising. And it's disappointing for people to celebrate and then not celebrate. And it's let people know what, who the winner is. You have months to prepare. The primaries were in June. You know who the candidates are. It used to be the primaries were in September in New York. So you have the primaries in June. So you have plenty of time to put the ballots out there, mail them out, and say, have them postmarked by October 15th or wherever the case may be. If you want to change your mind on who you voted for, you still have the option of requesting another one or going in person to vote or whatever the case may be. So there's no reason why these ballots shouldn't be if not counted and tallied before election day, at least have the total number of what ballots are there, and not he's ahead by 3,000 votes. Now we know what number we need to, how many more we need to put in there in order to overcome it. I'm not saying that's what happened. It
could have been.
Yeah,
we don't know that.
Yeah,
that's the problem. If we are uncertain of whether it was really real or rigged, that's a problem for the voters.
Definitely.
And this is what we're talking about. We have lost this certainty of fairness, and that's all we ask for. As voters, as citizens of the United States of America, as residents of this country, that's all we need to know. We need to know that the Constitution is upheld and the laws are being protected and respected. Yeah, and we don't know that at this point. I could not congratulate Congresswoman-elect Nicole Miliatakis, who is a dear friend of our radio, and she was here a number of times when she was running her campaign. We were happy to support her. Until very, very recently, there was not a definite win there either, even though that was, she won by a good amount on the night of the elections. Well, now we're certain, but it took a while. Yes.
Thank you, Mark.
No
Appreciate
problem.
your coming. I hope you're going to come next time. We're going to talk more about your policies, because that is a very, very interesting topic.
Yeah, everything's detailed on my website, markforny.com, under the issues page. If you're looking at it on the phone, then you got to click on the thing on the top left to put the drop-down menu. But under the issues page, it shows all the details about everything that I mentioned, the bank fees, the education, everything.
Mark, thank you so much. We need more people who are for the people, not for the establishment, and that's exactly who you are, and we appreciate it, and we appreciate the strength and the fight that you just went through, and maybe it's not even over, but definitely wish you lots of luck in anything that you...
I use the campaign slogan, the name with all the Z's in it, but I won't sleep on the job like other politicians do. I think they slept on me, and they're probably sleeping on me as far as investigating this process, and I'm going to do all that I can to ensure the integrity of the elections, and I think more people will be behind me if I do run again in 2 years, so we'll see what happens.
And we will appreciate if you keep us posted on the progress.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Бутик-политик. С понедельника по четверг с 3 до 5 вечера. Сказал, как обрезал.
В оставшиеся эти несколько минут в этом часе давайте все-таки коснемся визита на Нетаньяху, в котором его подозревают, если можно так выразиться. Да, был или не был, мы не знаем, потому что Нетаньяху, я сам слышал, как он сказал, визит в Саудовской Аравии между Нетаньяху. Как он сам сказал на заседании правительства, как я понимаю, что я никогда не комментировал подобные новости и не планирую их комментировать в будущем, что бы ни произошло. Поэтому, во-первых, об этом сообщили из 3 разных саудовских источника, в первую очередь. 3 разных официальных лица, так или иначе приближенные как бы к важным позициям монархии. Не называют, Нью-Йорк Таймс не назвал, Wall Street Journal не называет имена тех людей, которые впервые об этом сообщили, но все написали уже о том, что он там был, и он там был, Нетаньяху был там не один, а с Йоси Коэном, главой Моссада, который считается, кстати, потенциально может в какой-то момент стать кандидатом на пост премьер-министра лично. И это вообще интересная очень фигура, очень популярная сегодня, и достаточно публика знает о нем, он показывается иногда на экранах, то, что раньше, в принципе, когда-то было даже немыслимо, чтобы глава Моссада такую публичную активную жизнь вел, но в любом случае, они были там вместе, и там, в городе Неом, они летели частным самолетом туда, они вылетели, я так понимаю, из Тель-Авива частным самолетом, и пролетели от Саудовской Аравии до Израиля очень маленькое расстояние по Красному морю, прям невероятно маленькое, и когда вы выходите, допустим, на корабле из Эйлата в Красное море, то из своего опыта, я вам говорю, вам сразу показывают Саудовскую Аравию, там стоят нефтеналивайки, стоят резервуары, их видно, это Саудовская Аравия. Вам говорят, вот это Иордания, вы видите там Иорданию, а вот это Саудовская Аравия. То есть реально глазом можно видеть, и поэтому полет, я так понимаю, от Тель-Авива до Неома, города, саудовского города, самого ближнего к Красному морю, он, я думаю, занял не более 1,5 часов, я так понимаю, скорее всего, даже меньше, чем 1,5 часа. Вот. А там они встретились, allegedly, то есть по информации, с Мухаммадом бин Салманом. Кстати, министр иностранных дел Саудовской Аравии, принц Файзал, опроверг эту встречу, этого никогда не было, и он сказал также, что любая нормализация возможна только после подписания договора с палестинцами, что, конечно же, как мы понимаем, означает, что при таком раскладе никогда, да. Есть разные версии того, что же они там обсуждали. Опять же, исходя из того, что администрация в глубине уже понимает, что, скорее всего, 20 января зайдет другой президент, да, и, скорее всего, смена это произойдет. Из того, что транзит начался, мы это видим. Значит, администрация понимает, что готовится надо к худшему. По крайней мере, активные действия в сторону подготовки к худшему, они были сделаны. Шаги необходимые. Худшему именно для этой администрации. Соответственно, нужно было произвести определенные действия, которые, с одной стороны, и мы говорили с Юлией Юзик об этом вчера, кстати, тоже, которые, с одной стороны, должны исключить возможность возвращения Соединенных Штатов Америки в иранскую сделку, потому как обе стороны, и Израиль, и Саудовская Аравия, очень бы этого не хотели, о чем Нетаньяху уже много-много раз сказал, уже после наших выборов тоже сказал об этом, что он был бы выступал сильно против того, чтобы США возвращали сделку, потому что это вредит интересам Израиля. И тем более это вредит интересам Саудовской Аравии. В той парадигме этих интересов, как они сейчас их понимают, понимаете? Вот сейчас, да, из того взгляда, который есть, и после того, как Трамп уже вышел, возвращение на тех же условиях, которые были, неправильным. И, кстати, хоть я был против выхода Трампа из иранской сделки, считаю, что сегодня, уж после этого выхода, возвращение на тех условиях, которые были, было бы ошибкой. Уж если ты вышел, и мы из нее выходили, как страна, теперь возвращение должно быть на тех условиях, которые нас устраивают. Это не совсем те условия, которые Обама подписывал, потому что ситуация поменялась. И, на мой взгляд, сегодня в отношении Ирана, после дополнительных санкций, которые были введены, и после определенной кампании, которая была президентом по изоляции Ирана проведена, и после ликвидации Касема Сулеймани, мы то, что называется, имеем upper hand, да, у нас есть определенное преимущество сейчас, и инициатива на нашей стороне. Поэтому я считаю, что использовать это необходимо, и Байден будет сильно неправ, если попытается вернуть Америку в иранскую сделку на тех условиях, которые Обама подписал, я уже не говорю, на более выгодных для Ирана условиях. Условия должны быть выгодны для Америки, для Израиля и для Саудовской Аравии, потому как это в регионе наши главные союзники. Это могли они обсуждать. Также, если это правда, что Помпео с ними всеми двумя встречался, и встреча проходила в тройном формате, да, трехсторонняя была встреча, Мухаммад бин Салман, Помпео, Нетаньяху, тогда я представляю себе, что они, если идея о нанесении удара по иранским ядерным реакторам жива в администрации, что возможно, тогда они обсуждали потенциальные последствия и совместную координацию совместных действий в случае подобного удара и иранского ответа на этот удар. Вот, это мне тоже представляется абсолютно возможным и правильным действием в такой ситуации. Нам осталось недолго ждать, ребят, чтобы понять на самом деле, что же они там обсуждали, потому как нормализация, пока жив Салман бин Абдул-Азиз, нынешний король, вряд ли возможно без подписания договора с палестинцами, о чем принц Файзал, в принципе, сказал абсолютно четко, конкретно и без всяческих обиняков. Поэтому у меня нет оснований доверять Министерству дел Саудовской Аравии. Нормализация вряд ли. Военную кампанию или реакцию и дальнейшая координация антииранских действий, скорее всего. Вот так, мне кажется, и происходило на самом деле. И почему-то у меня очень мало сомнений в том, что Нетаньяху правда туда летал. А то, что саудиты будут все равно это отрицать, это понятно, потому как внутри Саудовской Аравии очень большая оппозиция подобным контактам без решения палестинского вопроса.
Бутик-политик. С понедельника по четверг с 3 до 5 вечера. Сказал, как обрезал.